you in the studios of ITN in London for the day's news. Good evening, you're watching the main news from ITN. Tonight's headlines: the government ends huge mortgage payouts to the rich. The United States is poised for the aid drop to Bosnia. And the Met's new chief calls for an end to racism. Unemployed tycoons are to lose their right to claim huge mortgage payouts from the state. The government says the taxpayer shouldn't be keeping former millionaires in their mansions. At the moment, there's no limit on the state mortgage benefits available to the very rich who fall on hard times.
Today's rule change follows the case, among others, of Trevor Deves, which clearly embarrassed ministers. It was discovered that Social Security was paying about £1,800 a week in interest on his £800,000 mortgage after he lost his job. Now ministers say payments will only be made on the first £150,000 of any mortgage.
Well, it is, of course, the job of Social Security to look after those whose needs are greatest, not those whose assets are greatest. And there's really no justification for taxpayers to be paying to keep former millionaires in their mansions. So what we expect to achieve is to strike a balance.
At present, 1,500 people claim income support on mortgages of more than £150,000. Ministers say that next year, 3,000 people will be affected when they reduce the cap further. Labour's Frank Field backs reform, but thinks ministers have gone for the wrong option. He also believes their idea of millionaires insuring themselves against unemployment is ridiculous.
Every small businessman that comes into our constituency surgeries will tell you they're taking second and third mortgages out in an attempt to prevent their business going under. To say to them, well, at this stage, you now take out an additional insurance policy is not only bizarre but cruel.
The government say they're doing this as a matter of principle. They don't expect it to save them a great deal of money, probably about £1.5 million this year and about £6 million next. Jo Andrews, ITN, Westminster.
American air crews are on standby tonight to begin dropping food and medical supplies over Bosnia. They've already scattered 1 million leaflets saying aid is on its way, and they've appealed to the Bosnians not to shoot at the relief planes.
Tonight, US air crews at Rhein-Main Air Base are ready for the off. They'll aim to drop food and medicine to Bosnians who've been cut off from supplies for months. Last night, 2 Hercules transports slipped in secret from the Frankfurt Air Base. High over Bosnia, scanners searched the ground below for signs of gun or missile attack. Fortunately, there were none. No aid in the back of the transporters last night, just boxes of leaflets. Some warned the Bosnians to keep clear of the aid pallets when they fall.
The other indicates that we're delivering humanitarian aid for all people and not to fire on U.S. aircraft.
Green light. Aye.
1 million leaflets were tossed into the night air in an effort to minimize the risks to the aircrew and to the hungry on the ground. Back at Frankfurt in a hangar, the pallets of army rations and medical supplies stood ready for loading. Questions remain as to whether they can be delivered safely and accurately from 2 miles up. But this operation is as much about demonstrating America's new eagerness to help in Bosnia as about delivering aid. Before the supplies could go, a check that the boxes did contain food and medicine by representatives from all 3 Bosnian communities flown in from Sarajevo. Early tomorrow morning, the Americans are expected to reveal how successful they think their operation has been. It may be several days, however, before we learn whether the people for whom the aid was intended actually received it. Jeffrey Archer, ITN, Frankfurt.
In the last hour, the captain of the American aircraft carrier John F. Kennedy, which is cruising in the Adriatic, has given details of how he will protect the relief planes if they get into trouble. ITN's Michael Nicholson is on board.
There are 13 ships in this battle group, among them the destroyer Karen that fired Tomahawk missiles into Baghdad last month. They have 78 aircraft and they are steaming only 50 miles from the coast, but the official line still is that they are here on routine exercises. Though tonight the Commander Admiral James Lear did say that his radar would be tracking the C-130s in and out of Bosnia and was close enough to help them if help was needed. He said it's hard to know the risks involved. We know they have missile and anti-aircraft sites, but it all depends on how much they want to oppose what we want to do.
Britain's most powerful police chief has launched a campaign to end racist abuse in the community and in his own force. The new Metropolitan Police Commissioner Paul Condon said there would be dire consequences if the thuggery of recent racist attacks on the continent were allowed to happen here.
Paul Condon took control of the Metropolitan Police 4 weeks ago. Today, in his first major speech, he singled out racism as something of which society must be totally intolerant.
Intolerant of racially motivated attacks, intolerant of those who indulge in racial abuse, and intolerant of those who use hatred and violence as the tools of their political expression.
The Commissioner promised to be equally hard on his own officers.
I am entitled to demand, and will demand, exemplary behaviour from everyone who works with and in the Metropolitan Police Service. And I will not compromise one iota on that statement.
Mr. Condon said the outright thuggery seen in Europe, where neo-Nazis have attacked immigrants, must not be allowed to occur here. But some at the Conference on Equality said words needed to be translated into deeds.
It's the translation of the feelings, the thoughts, the recommendations and the advice from this conference into direct action in exposing injustice within the police force that's going to make all the difference. Otherwise the public will just say, we've heard all this before and it's lip service.
The new Commissioner also pledged to continue the drive to recruit officers from the ethnic minorities. They still represent only 2% of the force, and that, he said, was not enough.
Labour has launched a strong attack on the government's record on juvenile crime. In a separate development, a mother whose young son was tortured by a juvenile gang today called for harsher sentences on violent young offenders. Tomorrow, the government will outline long-awaited plans for cracking down on juvenile crime.
There's no argument that juvenile crime is nearing the top of the political agenda. Where the main parties can't agree is what causes it. Every day brings a new victim. Neil Aspden is just 8. He was kidnapped and tortured by 2 13-year-old boys when he refused to join them on a shoplifting spree. They were ordered to spend 24 hours in a special centre and pay £30 costs after they admitted locking him in a shed and repeatedly beating him.
I think they should at least got put away until they're 16. I mean, I don't know whether they're going to do it again, but I mean, if they do it again, the next child might not be so lucky as Neil.
Shadow Home Secretary Tony Blair today outlined what he described as a new, tough approach from Labour.
If they are out of control and persistently offending, causing havoc and making life hell for people within local communities, we've got to be prepared to deal with that. And if necessary, that means putting them in secure accommodation.
The long-term solution, he said, was to give youngsters a future.
That if people are brought up in circumstances where they've got poor education, poor employment opportunities, very little hope and very little stake in society, if they've been brought up in a family where there's been tremendous problems, then they are more likely to commit criminal offences.
This week, Home Secretary Kenneth Clarke will set out his proposals for a new generation of approved schools designed to handle persistent young offenders between the ages of 12 and 15.
In Wales, there's been widespread condemnation of new threats by nationalists to burn down houses owned by English families. In the past, extremists have destroyed holiday homes. This is the first time English people who've settled in Wales have been targeted.
As worshippers throughout Wales turned out for services to mark tomorrow's St David's Day, a number of English families are waiting for the arrival of March the 1st with trepidation. Last November, letters from the clandestine group Maybe on Glyndŵr were sent to the homes of 13 English people, warning them to quit Wales by tomorrow or face the consequences. One was received by shopkeeper Ray Sutton. He believes he's a target because he refused to display a notice in Welsh in his shop.
I think you have to take it seriously. These people are known to burn people's properties down. And, you know, they are pretty ruthless.
A number of the threats have been received by English people living on the Clean Peninsula, who make up half the population there. The beauty of the scenery belies a history of attacks against holiday homes and businesses. Local people have condemned the latest threats.
That's disgusting, isn't it? I mean, Owen Glyndŵr was a hero, and these cowards, these villains, are using it as a front for their campaign. I don't think they have a right to use his name personally.
Nationalist politicians have also condemned the letters.
It is a distraction from the real issue of how can the people living in Wales, Welsh-speaking and English-speaking, people who've come in here to live from England or whatever, how can they have more power over what is happening in Wales?
With the March the 1st deadline only hours away, police say they've been in contact with the families. They've given them advice on how to protect themselves and their properties, but they're not revealing what those measures are. Anya Sitharam, ITN, North Wales.
Bosses at the Leyland DAF plant in Birmingham are hoping to save the company with a management buyout. Industry analysts believe most of the 1,200 workers could keep their jobs. The managing director, Alan Amy, is now trying to find backers to finance the deal.
Managers aren't yet ready to break cover with details of their plan, which they describe as robust and one which will ensure the future of the van factory. But they'll formally tell the receivers tomorrow that they want to go ahead. They're confident they can pick the company up off the floor after the traumas of recent weeks and are getting the full backing of the remaining workforce.
The future of this factory, the future of the product, is in new ownership. We genuinely believe the best ownership are the Midland industrialists who are there at the moment, supported by the workforce, and the company can go forward.
As the receivers struggle to persuade reluctant suppliers to continue feeding the factory with components, limited production has restarted. Industry analysts say everything's now in place for a successful takeover.
I think they could save most of the current workforce. I think they'd want to keep the full range in production, and also they do a great deal of work for other manufacturers. Much of the press work, for instance, of some of the Land Rover products are made by this company, and some other products as well. They're a very skilled pressing operation as well as a van maker.
The next 2 weeks will be crucial as the buyout plan is touted around investment houses and banks. Their initial reaction could ultimately decide whether this factory survives or dies. Jim Buchanan, ITN, Birmingham.
A lifeboat capsized in heavy seas off Teesside when it went to help a grounded oil tanker. One of the lifeboat crew was washed overboard, but he was later picked up safely by a helicopter rescue crew. The Danish-owned tanker was washed aground near Redcar. She was blown onto the rocks after slipping her anchor in a gale. An RAF helicopter airlifted the crew off the ship and they're now safely ashore. There's little threat of pollution from the tanker. The ship was almost empty. Lillian Gish, one of the last surviving stars of the American silent cinema, has died at her home in New York. She was 99. Lillian Gish's career spanned 75 years. She starred in her first film in 1912 and went on to make 40 others with the director D.W. Griffiths. She'll probably be best remembered for the groundbreaking 1915 epic Birth of a Nation. In 1984, at the age of 90, she was presented with a Life Achievement Award by the American Film Institute.
It's been a lucky and good life. I've worked 75 years for my living, and I haven't missed a day.
And she said, sound will kill the cinema because language will divide people by nation. The silent cinema is forever. And she was forever. Look at those films. She was magic.
Lillian Gish. In today's football, Paul Gascoigne's season at Lazio reached another low point when he was sent off in the match against Genoa. Gascoigne was given his first red card in Italy for lashing out at another player. Lazio still won 3-2. Here, Norwich failed to win maximum points in their chase for the top of the Premier League. They drew 0-0 with Blackburn. In today's other main encounter, Newcastle, who are leaders in the Barclays League Division 1, easily beat Tranmere 3-0. The Action Man craze came back into the front line today with the first Action Man convention ever held in Britain. At the peak of their popularity in the early 80s, there were nearly 1.5 million of them, one for each boy child in Britain.
The clipped tones and piercing eyes of the man who commanded the world's toy cupboards for almost 20 years. Descended from his transatlantic cousin, G.I. Joe, Action Man signed on for duty in 1966. To add European appeal, his designers turned to events 20 years earlier. Across Britain, Second World War adversaries faced one another again as youngsters rewrote military history. But disillusion following the Vietnam War led to other, less warlike guises. The flexible hero travelling in minutes from the Wild West to the moon.
Action Man was far and away the best quality doll that's ever been produced.
At Britain's first Action Man convention, such nostalgia did not come cheap.
For some people, it is an addiction. You see that. I mean, we have to talk them out of buying things because we know they can't afford them.
Today, a new-look Action Man prepares to do battle. But hasn't the world outgrown such aggression?
I've wondered about that many times when we were working on it, and I came to the conclusion that, in fact, if a child has any aggression in them, it helps them to get rid of it.
I'm actually a serving officer at the moment in the British Army, and it just sort of brings you back and thinks you played with them, and funny enough I grew up to be one in the end.
At least he's no longer taking orders.
Finally, a 2,000-year-old yew tree that provided arrows for the Battle of Agincourt has been saved from collapse. The yew at Staunton near Gloucester split in two and was about to fall apart. A team of volunteers pruned it and wired it together. Now the parish council say it should last for years more. And that's the news tonight from all of us here on the Weekend Team. Good night.
Hello there. Well, the wintry weather's going to continue in many places overnight, so you could well find you have a white start tomorrow morning with a dusting of snow in many places. Overnight, it's going to be bitterly cold once again with a widespread frost and icy roads across many parts of the country. But the snow is chiefly going to affect that more eastern side of the country, where in fact we could see some fairly prolonged and heavy showers in one or two places throughout the night. So there are those showers coming into the north and east there. I think the worst one probably going to be from East Anglia and the Wash, just north-eastwards up that eastern coast there. The north-easterly winds keeping coming in, so a cold, raw night in store. Temperatures falling well below freezing, so a bitter night to be out and about, so wrap up well if you are out and about. Tomorrow morning, well, a fairly bright start for Scotland and Northern Ireland there, basically dry. Further south, the snow showers in the east just beginning to edge their way inland a little bit, and there will be more cloudy day, I think, across much of England and Wales, and those snow showers getting over into more western side, perhaps of the country as the day progresses. And in the south and east, they will tend to die out a little bit as we go through the afternoon, but it will stay fairly cloudy in most places. Once again, a cold and raw day. The temperatures are very similar to those of today's, 3s and 4s, probably the best, but those winds quite strong, as you can see, and that's going to take the best off the top of those temperatures. Do wrap up well. Good night.
The night will be very cold with snow showers likely at times. Some of the showers could well be quite heavy, with several centimetres of snow in places and some drifting. The temperature will fall to around -4 degrees Celsius, that's 25 Fahrenheit, and that low temperature in combination with a fresh northeasterly wind will mean a severe frost everywhere. Tomorrow will be another very cold day with further snow showers, and once again some of them could well be quite heavy. There'll be some sunny intervals in between the showers, but not as much sunshine as today. The temperature will reach only 3 degrees Celsius, that's 37 Fahrenheit at best, and there'll be a fresh and gusty northeasterly wind. So, staying very cold with severe overnight frost and snow showers becoming more widespread and locally heavy.